never thought I'd find myself stranded on a private island, abandoned by the man I loved, and forced to escape in a helicopter with a stranger just to survive. And that's not even the worst part of this story. What I'm about to tell you will shock you, make you angry, and hopefully teach you something about recognizing red flags before it's too late. But before I dive into this incredible story, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Trust me, you'll want to remember this channel after what I'm about to tell you. So here's how it all started. Last September, I met this guy, and let me tell you, everything seemed perfect at first. We started dating casually, just getting to know each other, and honestly, it felt amazing. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in building something real with me. We spent months just enjoying each other's company, going on simple dates, talking for hours, and I really thought I had found someone special. Then, right before Christmas, he made it official. He asked me to be his girlfriend, and I was over the moon. This wasn't just some casual fling anymore. We were building a real relationship. He introduced me to his family, which was basically just his mother since she was the only family he had, and I introduced him to mine. Everything was moving in the right direction, or so I thought. Now, here's where things get interesting, and this detail will become crucial later in the story. His mother was a teacher at an exclusive private school, the kind where wealthy families send their children. Because of her job, my boyfriend had grown up around money, around privilege, around people who lived in a completely different world than I did. He wasn't rich himself. His family was just working class like mine. But he had been exposed to wealth his entire life and had developed friendships with people who had serious money. At first, I didn't think much of it. When we would go out and run into his friends, I noticed they dressed differently, talked differently, and seemed to have unlimited resources. But they were polite to me. Some of them were actually quite nice, and I figured, hey, people are people, right? Rich or poor, good people are good people. But here's where I started noticing some red flags, though I didn't recognize them as red flags at the time. Sometimes my boyfriend would want to go to expensive restaurants, places where a single meal would cost more than I made in a day. When I would tell him honestly that I couldn't afford it, he would either offer to pay for me, or he would go without me to meet his friends. At the time, I thought this was considerate. He was being understanding of my financial situation and not pressuring me to spend money I didn't have. Looking back now, I realized this was the beginning of a pattern. He was living in two worlds. The world he shared with me, where we did affordable things and lived within normal means, and the world he shared with his wealthy friends, where money was no object and expensive experiences were just part of life. The problem was, he was starting to prefer that second world, and I was about to find out just how much. But wait, because what happened next will show you just how deep this rabbit hole goes. And trust me, you're not prepared for where this story leads. In April of this year, we had been together for several months, and our relationship felt solid. We had met each other's families, we were spending most of our free time together, and everything seemed to be progressing naturally towards something serious and long-term. So when he suggested we take a romantic getaway, just the two of us, I was thrilled. Finally, some quality time away from work, away from stress, just us focusing on our relationship. But then he told me the details, and this is where I should have seen the warning signs flashing like neon lights. This wasn't going to be a trip to some cozy bed and breakfast or a weekend at a regular resort. No, we were going to stay at one of his friends' houses. And this house? It was in one of the most exclusive areas you can imagine. The kind of place where property values are so high that only the ultra-wealthy can afford to live there. I remember thinking, okay, this is a little outside my comfort zone, but it could be fun. I had never experienced that level of luxury before, and I was curious about how the other half lives. Plus, it was supposed to be romantic, just me and my boyfriend in this beautiful location, making memories together. Little did I know that this trip would reveal the true character of the man I thought I loved, and the ending would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about relationships, loyalty, and human decency. When we arrived at the meeting point, I got my first real taste of the world my boyfriend moved in. Some of his friends had arrived by helicopter. Not a taxi, not a private car service, a helicopter. I stood there watching these people casually climb out of aircraft like it was the most normal thing in the world, and I started to understand that the wealth gap here was even bigger than I had imagined. From there, we had to take a boat to reach the actual house. And when I say boat, I need you to understand that this wasn't some little fishing boat or pleasure craft. This was a yacht, a massive, luxurious yacht that probably cost more than most people's houses. It had a name painted on the side in elegant letters, and everything about it screamed money and status. When we finally arrived at the house, I was honestly speechless. This wasn't just a vacation home. This was like something you'd see in an architectural magazine. Multiple stories, floor-to-ceiling windows, panoramic views, and enough bedrooms to house a small hotel's worth of guests. There were staff members there to greet us and show us to our rooms. And yes, my boyfriend and I were given our own private room in this mansion. For a moment, I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. Here I was, a regular working person, staying in this incredible place with the man I loved, surrounded by luxury I had never experienced before. The views were breathtaking, the accommodations were perfect, and initially, everyone was friendly and welcoming. We arrived in the morning, so after getting settled, everyone headed down to the private beach. And let me tell you, when rich people have a private beach, it's not just a strip of sand. This was like a resort-quality beach, with comfortable seating, pristine waters, and staff members bringing drinks and snacks throughout the day. I tried to just enjoy it, to soak in this once-in-a-lifetime experience, and not worry about how out of place I felt. But when we came back for lunch, that's when the mask started to slip, and I began to see these people for who they really were. The staff had prepared this elaborate lunch spread, and as we all sat down to eat, I started paying attention to the conversations happening around me. At first, it was just typical small talk, discussion about mutual friends, upcoming events, vacation plans. But then the tone started to shift, and I began hearing comments that made my stomach turn. Some of the group started making jokes about the staff members who were serving us. Not lighthearted, friendly banter, but cruel, demeaning comments about their appearance, their intelligence, their worth as human beings. I heard someone say something about how lucky these workers were to even see food this expensive, let alone serve it. Another person made a comment wondering if poor people even knew what real seafood tasted like. These weren't isolated comments from one problematic person. This was a pattern of behavior from multiple people in the group, and they were all laughing and encouraging each other. They were treating the staff like they were invisible, like they were less than human, and they seemed to find genuine entertainment in mocking people who were just trying to do their jobs. I felt sick. These people were talking about workers the same way they might talk about animals at a zoo, with casual cruelty and complete dehumanization. And the worst part was that these comments weren't just about the staff. They were making broader generalizations about poor people, about working class people, about people like me. I couldn't stay quiet. I had to say something to my boyfriend about how uncomfortable this was making me. So I pulled him aside and tried to explain, as diplomatically as possible, how disturbing I found his friend's behavior. I told him I understood these were his longtime friends, but I asked him how he could be comfortable around people who treated workers so badly, and who seemed to have such contempt for people from backgrounds like ours. And that's when he said something that completely changed how I saw him, and set in motion the events that would lead to my abandonment and dramatic escape. When I said people like us, referring to the fact that we were both from working-class families, he got offended. Not offended by his friend's behavior, offended by me grouping him together with regular working people. He seemed to think that because he had grown up around wealth and had wealthy friends, he was somehow closer to being one of them than he was to being one of us. This was a man whose mother was a teacher, who worked a regular job himself, who had never inherited money or owned property, or had any of the advantages that his friends had been born with. But in his mind, proximity to wealth had somehow transformed him into something different, something better than the class he actually belonged to. We had a small argument about it, nothing too dramatic, but I could see that I had touched a nerve. He was genuinely upset that I had reminded him of his actual place in the world, and I realized that he had been living in a fantasy where he convinced himself he belonged in this wealthy circle, rather than just being tolerated on the edges of it. I decided to drop the subject because I didn't want to ruin the trip. We were stuck there anyway. We had arrived on someone else's yacht and couldn't exactly call a taxi to leave, so I apologized for bringing it up and tried to focus on enjoying the rest of our time there. That evening, everyone gathered for drinks and conversation, and it actually turned out to be a pleasant night. People were on their best behavior. The conversation stayed light and friendly, and for a few hours, I was able to forget about the earlier unpleasantness and just enjoy the experience. But when we went to bed that night, something had changed between us. The romantic connection I had been hoping for on this getaway was completely gone. My boyfriend was distant and cold, and instead of the intimate evening I had been anticipating, he literally turned away from me and went to sleep without a word. I lay there in that luxurious bed, in that beautiful room, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in a relationship. I knew something fundamental had shifted between us, but I had no idea how bad things were about to get. Because the next morning, I would wake up to discover that the man I loved had done something so cruel, so unthinkable, that it would change my life forever. When I opened my eyes the next morning, the first thing I noticed was that I was alone in the bed. I figured my boyfriend had gotten up early, maybe gone for a walk on the beach, or joined some of the other guests for breakfast. I got dressed and went looking for him, ready to put the previous day's tension behind us and enjoy our last day in paradise. But when I asked around, trying to find him, I got some very strange responses. People seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact, giving me vague non-answers. Finally, one of the women pulled me aside, and with obvious embarrassment, she told me what had happened. My boyfriend had left. Not just left the house for a morning activity, he had left the island entirely. Some of the guests had departed early that morning, and he had gone with them, without saying a word to me, without leaving a message, without any explanation whatsoever. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Here I was, stranded on a private island, surrounded by people I barely knew, with no way to get home, and no idea why the person I trusted most in the world had abandoned me there. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. I sent text messages, but he didn't respond. I was completely cut off from him, left to figure out how to get home from this remote location entirely on my own. The humiliation was overwhelming. Everyone at the house knew what had happened, and I could see the pity in their eyes when they looked at me. But just when I thought my situation couldn't get any worse, a stranger's kindness would lead to the most terrifying and surreal experience of my life. I spent the day in a daze, trying to process what had happened while also trying to figure out how I was going to get home. The house was beautiful. The other guests were polite, but I felt like a ghost wandering through someone else's life. I packed my belongings and just waited, hoping someone would be traveling back to the mainland and could give me a ride. Finally, late in the afternoon, one of the women approached me. I'll call her Patricia. Patricia told me she was leaving around 5 o'clock and offered to give me a ride back to the city. I was so grateful I almost cried. I had been terrified that I might be stuck there overnight or longer, with no way to contact anyone and no money to arrange private transportation. But then Patricia mentioned, almost casually, that she had arrived by helicopter and would be leaving the same way. She asked if I was comfortable flying, and my heart sank. I had never been in a helicopter before, and honestly, the idea terrified me. But what choice did I have? This was my only way off the island, and I couldn't afford to be picky about transportation. When 5 o'clock came, I found myself walking across a helipad toward this gleaming aircraft, my legs shaking with fear and my mind racing with thoughts of all the things that could go wrong. The pilot helped me into the passenger seat. Patricia climbed in beside me, and before I could fully process what was happening, we were lifting off into the sky. The flight was simultaneously the most beautiful and most terrifying experience of my life. The views were incredible. We flew over pristine coastline, dense forests, and sparkling water that stretched to the horizon. But every bump of turbulence, every slight change in the engine noise, every moment of that flight had me gripping my seat and praying we would make it safely to our destination. But even after surviving that helicopter ride, my ordeal was far from over, and the night ahead would test my resourcefulness and determination in ways I never could have imagined. When we finally landed, I realized I had a new problem. Patricia lived in one of the wealthiest suburbs outside the city, and I lived on the complete opposite side of town. The distance between where we had landed and where I needed to go was enormous, and it was already getting dark. Patricia was kind enough to offer to call me a taxi or ride service, but when I calculated the cost of traveling that distance, I realized it would cost more money than I had available. I was looking at a fare that represented a significant portion of my monthly income, and I simply couldn't afford it. I thanked Patricia for the helicopter ride and told her I would figure out how to get home from there. She seemed concerned about leaving me alone in an unfamiliar area after dark, but I insisted I would be fine. The truth was, I was terrified, but I was too embarrassed to admit that I couldn't afford the transportation home. After Patricia left, I found myself standing outside a gated community with no clear plan for how to get home. I approached the security guard at the entrance and explained my situation, hoping he might have some advice about public transportation or cheaper travel options. The guard was sympathetic and tried to help. He explained that there were buses that could eventually get me back to my part of the city, but it would require multiple transfers, and some of the stops were in areas that weren't safe for a woman alone at night. He recommended that I at least take a taxi to a central location where I could catch safer public transportation. So that's what I did. I used a significant portion of my available money to take a taxi to a transportation hub, then spent the next several hours navigating buses, trains, and subway systems, making transfer after transfer, slowly working my way across the city toward home. It was after midnight when I finally reached my neighborhood, exhausted, emotionally drained, and with barely enough energy to make it up the stairs to my apartment. I had work early the next morning, so I basically had time for a quick shower and a few hours of sleep before starting another day. As I sat in my apartment that night, processing everything that had happened, I realized this experience had taught me something crucial about relationships, about character, and about the importance of recognizing when someone's values don't align with your own. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I was hurt, angry, confused, and embarrassed. I kept trying to make sense of what had happened, to understand how someone I had been in a relationship with for months could treat me so cruelly. I wrote him a long message explaining how his actions had affected me, how abandoned and humiliated I felt, and asking for some kind of explanation or apology. I wasn't even necessarily trying to save the relationship at that point. I just wanted to understand how someone could do something so heartless to another human being. But he never responded. Not only did he ignore my message, but he blocked me on all social media platforms and made it impossible for me to contact him through any digital means. It was like I had never existed in his life at all. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that his reaction to my comments about his friends had revealed something fundamental about his character. He was so invested in maintaining his connection to that wealthy social circle that he was willing to sacrifice our relationship rather than acknowledge the problematic behavior I had witnessed. In his mind, I had committed an unforgivable sin by pointing out that he wasn't actually one of them, that he was just a working-class person who happened to move in wealthy circles. My honesty had shattered his fantasy about himself, and rather than facing that reality, he chose to eliminate me from his life entirely. Looking back now, I can see that this experience, as painful as it was, taught me invaluable lessons about recognizing red flags and understanding what really matters in a relationship. The most important lesson I learned is that you can't build a genuine relationship with someone who is ashamed of who they really are. My ex-boyfriend was so desperate to distance himself from his actual background and circumstances that he couldn't handle being with someone who reminded him of his real place in the world. I also learned that how someone treats service workers, staff members, and people in less powerful positions is one of the most reliable indicators of their true character. The way his friends spoke about and treated the people who were serving us should have been a massive red flag, and his comfort with that behavior should have told me everything I needed to know about his values. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that real love and genuine partnership require someone who is proud to be with you, who doesn't see you as a liability or an embarrassment, who doesn't abandon you when things get uncomfortable or challenging. The man I thought I was building a future with was willing to leave me stranded in a remote location, rather than defend me or stand up for what was right. That's not the behavior of someone who truly loves and respects their partner. That's the behavior of someone who cares more about social status than human decency. And while this story has a painful ending in terms of the relationship, it also has an empowering ending in terms of the lessons learned and the strength discovered. In the months since this happened, I've had time to process the experience and gain perspective on what it really meant. Yes, it was humiliating and painful to be abandoned like that. Yes, it was scary and expensive to have to find my own way home from such a remote location. Yes, it hurt to realize that someone I cared about was capable of such cruelty. But it also showed me that I'm stronger and more resourceful than I had ever realized. When faced with a seemingly impossible situation, I found a way to survive and get home safely. When abandoned by someone I trusted, I discovered that I didn't need that person to take care of myself. Most importantly, this experience taught me to trust my instincts about people and situations. When I felt uncomfortable with his friend's behavior, I was right to speak up. When I sensed that my boyfriend was more invested in his wealthy social circle than in our relationship, I was picking up on something real and significant. Now I know to pay attention to those warning signs, to take them seriously, and to prioritize my own dignity and self-respect over maintaining relationships with people who don't share my values. The story I just shared with you is completely true. It was sent to me by a follower from another social media platform who wanted to share their experience anonymously, and I'm grateful they trusted me with such a personal and painful story. If you found this story impactful, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. And please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story and any similar experiences you might have had. Remember, your worth isn't determined by how much money you have or what social circles you move in. Real relationships are built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Don't settle for anyone who makes you feel ashamed of who you are or where you come from. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.